because they need to understand there is a game, and to the game, there is the rules. And we have to stick to the rules, especially when it comes to protecting, that at some point the game will end.
Welcome to the Circuit Magazine, the #1 source of information on protection matters, the industry-leading magazine for all security professionals who want to stay ahead of the game.
Behavioural analysis and risk factors for children. Today, Shaun West and myself are delighted to be speaking with Sandra Adiarte, the founder of Apollo Synergetics, a consultant from Germany focusing on behavioural analytics training and consultancy in this area. Lovely to focus on this topic, Shaun. Why is it so important?
Well, I'm looking forward to this one because I actually met Sandra at the 9th annual CP Technology Forum, which was, again, we mentioned it, a great event. It was great to bump into her. It was the first time she'd been to the event, but she was really interesting, actually. And I totally see the value in the training that could be delivered on that front about, finding the right people, putting them in the right places. Because if you're working as a bodyguard for a family, things can get extremely emotive, right? Where it surrounds children. And I think some of the things that we'll talk about within the podcast is some of the high net worth families who maybe have been born into money potentially, and they've grown up. Maybe they don't haven't lived life like, say, you or I have. So maybe they have a different view of the world to us. And we have different views on life. We have different skills. And we need to be able to work with a family. Obviously, you have to have thick skin, right? When you work with high net worth individuals, there's a lot of time where when you're doing what is the correct thing to you is not the correct thing to them. And sometimes you can take a lot of income, and it's being able to deal with that. And some of the tools that Sandra can give you can help you navigate them waters more easily.
But surely there'll be operators out there saying, well, a gig is a gig is a gig. I'm not there to be a nanny. But surely there's a happy medium. Maybe the way you speak to the child, or can you command the child? I mean, these are big questions.
Mm-hmm. No, you're absolutely right. And no, you're not there to be a nanny, but you are there to provide a service to that family or that principal, looking after the child. And if you can improve your skills in areas in whatever it may be, yes, situational awareness, the way you speak to the child, the way you speak to the parents, you're there as a professional. You need to talk to them as a professional. You're not a friend. You're not a paid friend. You're there as a bodyguard, delivering a service, and any tools that you can take on board to improve that service, we should be looking at.
I like it. And yeah, this will be a great string to our bow in the magazine. Obviously, we're bringing the pages of the magazine to life, so hopefully we'll get some fantastic articles inside the magazine on this topic too. As new generations are investing in the next generation, as we heard at the event, that there is more focus than ever on the shape and content, delivered to that sort of generation alpha, as it were. Anyway, we don't need to get into the generations just yet. Let's look at this behavioural analysis risk factors for children with Sandra Adiarte.
And now, let's meet one of the contributors to the Circuit Magazine.
Behavioural analysis, risk factors for children. Shaun West and myself are delighted to welcome Sandra Adiarte, a consultant from Germany, founder and owner of Apollo Synergetics, who is a trainer and consultant focusing on behavioural analytics. Sandra, lovely to have you on. How are you doing?
No, thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited. How are you guys doing?
Yeah, doing very well, actually. But up north in the UK, it's absolutely freezing. So I'm not enjoying the weather so much.
Well, let's focus then not on weather, but on children. But before we do that, what is the problem we're trying to solve?
We are trying to solve the complex problem of understanding behaviors in context. So when we're protectors, when we are doing security management around any kind of individual in a team, we are really trained. We get trained in analyzing all of relevant aspects in mitigating risks and avoiding threats. And these can be tremendously influenced by all components that are, in the situation involving the individuals as well as situational aspects, as we all know. And the behavioral aspects are a key component because we should be ahead of the curve, identifying the threat or the risks, before they actually make things go sideways.
Fantastic. No, that makes sense, and it's great. Everyone cares about their children, or at least our principals do. What about you? Obviously, we're delighted to have you on the podcast, but where does your passion for this area come from?
I have been working around people of different age groups for over 30 years of my life. So I have been teaching movement and all sorts of different kinds of things in age groups that are really relevant for this for understanding this complex matter. And adding on the movement analysis and the psychology and the research in behavioral analyses kind of makes it a very complex analysis tool to understand these complex situations. So the passion in it is really that, for me, being a former dance educator and mover, understanding movement on a muscular level or fascial level, if you will, is very normal to me. So for me, anything that I see is movement, and anything that I see and is movement to me is describable, and then also trainable to anybody who is interested in enhancing their observational skills in relation to their profession.
Fantastic, and that's an interesting combination, dance and risk management. We'll get into that. But what about the completely uninitiated protector? Perhaps they're a solo practitioner. Perhaps they are simply, quote unquote, doing their job. What should they better understand about this, particularly in relation to children?
Well, it all starts with asking yourself, do you like children? So a part of the whole thing would be the you could say exploration, I would call it. Being aware of your own biases when it comes to dealing with children in certain age groups. This is how it starts. And it is important that somebody understands at an early stage that the attitude of a child, the age of a child, the psychophysical aspects of the behavior of the child can influence tremendously how you can work with the principal or the child or a complex detail with a whole team. And that the risk factors rise. They just go up with you not managing parts and components of those things professionally. So you need to be aware of the implications of developments, physical and cognitive. You need to be aware of the capabilities of children, how they can cope, how the bonding behavior is between the principal and the child. And there are several other components that are really important to look at. But the most important thing is that you take time to take a moment and really evaluate those in relation to yourself.
Really interesting, actually, Sandra. I mean, in my background in the security industry, I've worked with children of all ages, and exactly what you said, the age, developmental stage that they're at can bring so many different factors. I mean, if you've got a really young children, you've got, the tantrums and everything that comes, but that also, it can throw the principal off his day because it puts him in a frantic peace of mind. But then you've got the teenage and all of the things that come with that when you're looking after a young teenage girl and they want to go out and they're meeting boys and, they want to carry on, do things that maybe their parents wouldn't approve of, and you as a bodyguard stuck in the middle of that, you're kind of on that knife edge, right, of how do I deal with this situation? And definitely having some training in this sort of situational awareness, behavioral analysis will give you some more tools in dealing with these situations, right?
Exactly. And also another component, which I'm sure is already a vital part of the training of protectors as well, is the legal implications that come with failing So, security management around children, SMAC, it says children in there, but I'm including the teenagers, meaning that if, one of those girls or boys falls in love with you, but you still need to manage, how the detail goes, you need to be aware of the implications if you fail to communicate to the team, correctly. And so it's also about, securing yourself, if you will, in a way, to be aware of how concrete do you need to guide and lead certain aspects of communication in order to be clear with the implications for everyone involved. And it might even be, I cannot be the one doing this. We have to rotate the team, or guess what? I'm out all the way, unfortunately.
I have huge experience of this as well, where definitely where the family, the child gets attached to one of the bodyguards, and they really, I want Shaun every day. I want him to do the school run or whatever it may be. And it becomes a problem when, the guy that they're attached to, and then, on the following Wednesday, Jon has to come in to rotate with this guy, right? Mm-hmm. And the family's like, oh, no, you can't leave because Susie wants you.
Yes.
And it causes rifts in the team because almost team members can feel, I'm not wanted. They worry for their job. Mm-hmm. But also it puts pressure on the guy who is favoured. And, it's great to be liked. However, the impact over a long period of time, it's, things like Christmases and family holidays, it's all of a sudden you're wanted for them as well. So you're not getting that time off. And I think it's a bit of education to the family that, people need to be rotated to keep fresh, alert, on top of their game. But also it's having good professional boundaries as a protector as well, because some people, maybe if they're new to the industry and they say, oh, I'm getting really liked here by this child and it's going to get me in with the family, they kind of run with that. And I think the one thing you can never forget, you are always a staff member, right? You are not family. And I've seen so many people get caught up in that way. They think I'm the favourite, but it will always come back. Blood is thicker than water. It might just be a child is, I don't know, chasing a ball. She tripped over on the curb, hits her head, and all of a sudden you're no longer the favourite and you're out of the job. So if you've got the professional boundaries and you are rotating, you are alert, it just keeps everything right. It's black and white. You're there to provide a service. Yes, of course, you can become fond of the child, fond of the family, but they're not paying you to be a friend. They're paying you to deliver a service and provide a job.
And another thing is important that just adds on and links in very nicely to what you just said is the implications of culture. So if, you have a family that is, from a completely different continent altogether, and they're running their family business, let me call it like that, in a certain way, and there's certain hierarchy going on, you might not have a saying in a lot of things. And the feel of not having a say might be very different to what you're used to. So you are basically really treated like a servant. Yeah. And although you might see another approach, for example, to the child might be better, or specifically when it comes to managing, how to get from A to B, what to have in the rucksack in case of, something goes sideways, what we need to pack, what we need to have on the detail and things like that. It might just really cause friction, just like you described, in between the client, the principal, the whole family system, in between, and it's unfortunate, but the groups of females and males, so it gets more complicated from there.
Yeah, I mean, the culture is a massive thing, and I think with any family you're going to work with, you need to spend a bit of time, right, and learn a bit about that culture, because you'll be making decisions based on, I guess, how you live your life, how you brought your children up, and what's right for you may not be right for that principal and their family. I mean, I've seen, where the principals are it's almost an unnatural behaviour surrounding their children, where they're going into a secure school that has security and gated grounds, and it's like, right, we want the bodyguard to go in there and sit outside the class and sit, and trying to have these conversations with the family and say, look, if the school thinks your child isn't at that much threat, they're just not going to allow your child into the school. There's done their own risk assessments, they've got their own security. And if you start freaking that school out, your son or your daughter's going to stand out as well. Who's this strange guy standing outside all of the time when she's in school? So it's having a bit of, you need to be there to sanity check, these, principals and family members as well. And sometimes it's really tough, right? Because it's work for you. You don't lose your job. But it's having them professional boundaries. They're paying you for a service, not a friendship. And sometimes you have us being aware of their culture. I think also there needs to be a bit of, if they're in our country, they're in our school system, that there needs to be a bit awareness of, I guess, the British culture as well. It may be fine in another country where you have got the bodyguard sitting outside the classroom all of the time, where it's a bit different here, and it might ring some alarm bells that maybe they don't want rising. But yeah, no, it's really interesting. Sure.
Two more points need to be mentioned, which are also really key elements and need to be addressed. One is some sort of former physical or psychological trauma. So either, living somewhere among this family, or even the child, or even a troubled mind of the client. So this is why I also, offer consultation, because I'm a therapist. So I'm really also concerned about identifying the behavioral aspects or behavioral components of identifying personalities that might have a troubled mind. So, because this can just escalate situations in such a way that they're almost uncontrollable. And for you, it happens, the observer, and it just happens so fast, the one that you're protecting is going crazy. That's a whole different level. You expect somebody from the outside probably attacking your client, but not the other way around. Yeah.
Well, it's funny you should say that, and we're talking about having experience of these things. And one thing I've found, and I don't know what your experience or how you found it, Sandra, but when you've been born into the wealth, you haven't created the wealth. You've been born into this wealth. So you've grown up as a child. You've never been told no. You've had everything you ever wanted, and then as soon as you go to a school and you start your teacher saying no, and all of a sudden there's the tantrums. You get upset. You come back, tell your parents, I don't like this teacher, or I don't like this school, and then you can have the unnatural behavior. Okay, right, we're going to change the school. And I've seen that where they've moved them to another school, and then they went to another school. And this almost, this, in my mind, this is no good for the child because they can't settle. They've got no roots. And this behavior goes into life. So when they get to teenagers and they get to, into their late teens, 20s, and I've worked with people who are in their 30s, but they're almost still like a teenager because they haven't learned lessons that normal people would learn whilst they're growing up, because they've never been told no. They've had cotton wool wrapped around them all their lives. And exactly what you've just said, I've had cases where we're protecting the principal from outside factors, and then all of a sudden you're protecting the principal from themselves, just self-erupting and getting themselves into so much trouble. And it's because they haven't learned the skills how to communicate, maybe. Just interacting with people. They don't have them skills. They're very well educated, but lack some, I don't know, common sense maybe sometimes.
It is resilience and coping strategies, because,
strategies. Yes,
exactly.
That's the one.
This is the other point that I wanted to mention. This after pandemic phase and this economic kind of turmoil and the let's say the situation that the world is in at this very moment, it brings a certain sensitivities around how we sense and feel our security around us, if we are happy with how it feels or not, and obviously it's a little bit challenging at the moment. And for the people that grew up in peace, for them, they're somehow losing it, although nothing happened yet here, maybe where we are. We see, things happening in other parts of the world, but it affects us because we are flooded with the images and the pictures. Now, the question is, how do you cope on a daily basis with the challenges that you have? Well, if you're not challenged, guess what? You're not going to learn how to cope. Yeah. And then, of course, you don't want to challenge a child And this really depends on the age group, and it depends on how we bond with our children, and it depends on what kind of approach and culture I have. This is a whole complex discussion right here. But if this friction and the challenge and the support is not put into the system in order to help the child develop their own coping strategies, and also fail, because we need to fail in order to learn, unfortunately. But the problem is, okay, to finish that sentence, if we don't do that, the challenge is that, they don't learn these kind of skills. They don't have these kind of skills. And I just recently commented on a post showing a tried abduction at the entrance of this shopping mall or something. And you can see from the way the guy was trying to pick up the child, the mother intervened and she picked up the child. You can see that this reaction in the body is like a wet cat, so that the reaction of the child is complete giving into the safeguarding of the mother. The mother is, pulling this child away, and nothing happened, thank God. But I'm just saying, in different age groups, the reactions of the body, I'm talking about the body, and then of the mind, and then of the child or the teen will be completely different. Because let's jump to the teen. It might just happen that in the teenage age, I'm not moving. You can shout as much as you want, but just because I like saying no now, and I have my own personality, I'm not moving just to make your blood pressure go up. So this is something that is really, really problematic, because it takes a very direct and open communication in between all parties involved, or professional teammates that just know how to run this show. They just kind of need to know how to work around those things, because the parents might not want to challenge the child. The parents don't want this kind of friction. So you, as the professionals, need to know how to set up the team, how to talk to all involved, how to bring those risks to the awareness of the client in order to do what you are paid for, to secure the client, to protect.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually, in what you said there. Picking the right people for the right job, I think, is very important. I've worked with great guys who don't have kids, but they've been fantastic with the families they've worked for, because they've had the right temperament. But yeah, putting the right person, the wrong person in the job with kids can be completely futile. And I think what we need a lot of the time is also what you said there. Sometimes the parents don't want to be the one to discipline the children, and that's fine. And if that's the case, what they have to give is the support to the bodyguards, the nannies, whoever it may be. So when they're telling their daughter, no, you can't cross the road at this time, or whatever it may be, you can't be drinking your 13-year-old, or whatever it might be, they require the support from them parents to be able to make them decisions. But what I find in a lot of security teams, and it's, again, difficult situations people get put in, when you're the one who's now on duty and you're seeing the child doing whatever they're doing, and I've seen people just turn their back, and I don't want to be the one to raise it because it's going to put the spotlight on me. Mm-hmm. And when that is the case, you are not doing your job. Mm-hmm. You have to highlight these behaviors, and yes, it puts you in a difficult situation, but that is what you're paid to be there for, right? You're there for the care of the children on behalf of that principle. So you have to make these difficult decisions, and that's why you get paid good money as a bodyguard. You have to be able to step up when the time requires.
But Shaun, and maybe this is just devil's advocate or outside person looking in, surely many listeners will say, yeah, super communication skills with children would be amazing, but how? And how do I speak to a toddler? How do I speak to a teenager? What do I have to use baby language suddenly? How's that going to look professionally? And I know, Sandra, you have many different hats, and even the word synergetics within your company speaks to win-win. Is this more about forming that win-win relationship? But then how do you avoid being the buddyguard? My new buddy, he's 5 years old. How does that work?
It's a very good question. Well, the parts that you've mentioned are really relevant because, again, you need to know that a toddler has a different number of words available as compared to a 13-year-old. So, the numbers are somewhere between thousands and 10 and 100,000 at the age of 17 or 18. So this is really relevant, what you're just mentioning. And it is true that in certain situations, when children of certain ages are involved, I don't talk to the child at all. I have to talk to the nanny, or I have to talk to the mother or the principal involved, which means, again, this is trainable. I tell you once, you never make a mistake again. So these kind of things that you're mentioning is really something that you would learn on the course. You would then know when you leave the course how you identify where the child is in the developmental stage and what might be the best approach in order to get your the task or whatever you need to communicate across. Whether you have to communicate to the child direct, it might be you have to do a command, no questions. We're not asking questions. We're giving information, or we're giving tasks, or we're giving commands, because otherwise, if I come into an argument or a conversation, then the time is just running and we haven't moved. So it really depends on the situation, it depends on the task, and it is trainable. And how? Well, I would like to avoid the phase of trial and error by teaching you how to identify the behaviors that are relevant and how to approach the certain elements of tasks that you need to address at certain age groups.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really good question, Phelim, and it's what you said. How do you avoid becoming, I don't know, a buddyguard? Something like that. I've seen that with the drivers as well, where the child loves driver A, and I only want him to drive me, and they hold on. And it's all about that, that professional barrier that you've got to put in between yourself. Of course, you can speak like a child and you can build rapport. We have to do that. But there is also the line that, please don't cross that line. I'm here to do a job for you. And and there is times where you've got to speak to the parents. But there's also that line where maybe the parents, or some of the people, as we just spoke about earlier, could be ones that have been born into the wealth as well. So they haven't had them coping strategies, and they haven't had learned life like maybe you or I have. And because they haven't coped with things themselves, when they see their son or their daughter getting upset, it's all throwing their arms around, and it becomes almost an erratic behavior. And when you're doing something that's, like you said, right for you, and you think it's right for the child, it's not always right for that particular family and principal. And I've seen guys losing jobs for doing absolutely the right thing. Child's in danger. They've informed the parents, but because the child was crying, it's right, get rid of him. She no longer likes him, and it's a sad situation when that happens. But unfortunately, it's the world we live in, and it's the profession we've chosen. But yeah, if you can get some more training in these sort of elements and how to limit your exposure, have some more tools in the box. I don't see any reason why anyone wouldn't take that up.
Another thing that links nicely into what you just said is that organizing behaviors, understanding behaviors, leading and professional management of teams also involves knowing the skill set of your other team members. So if I get into the situation, I'm imagining this could happen, the child gets really attached to me, but we need to move now, we need to go, something's happening, whatever. It might just be that one look that you give to your colleague or the nanny or the principal, or whoever is there in the situation, that knows when you give this look, or when you do the certain sign code that you have decided on, then now the game is over. And this is something that is I by teaching so many individuals over so many decades, this is something that is always the challenge, an understandable challenge in between the communication between the trainer, the protector, the teacher, the whatever you want to call it, and the parent. because they need to understand there is a game, and to the game there is the rules, and we have to stick to the rules, especially when it comes to protecting, that at some point the game will end. Yeah. And this is something that nobody, I guess nobody, even including me, if somebody tells me, yeah, you cannot do this today, of course I'll be upset if I really like doing it. But when it comes to protection, this is where the story ends. And this is just something that then again is a miscommunication in between the team members or towards the client, which then needs to be addressed in a different way.
So Sandra, how then do you reconcile that with actually communicating a threat? So Shaun mentioned before, bodyguard outside the classroom, and if the threat's really that real, then there's big things going on. But I mean, imagine, the threat is that real. Someone is likely to waltz into a school and steal your kid. How do you communicate that without frightening them too much?
Well, you're talking to a German emancipated woman, which is going to answer you. You have to communicate it directly. Unfortunately, there is just a level of threat where we have to communicate directly and where we have to say, okay, listen, in order to keep this space safe and to keep this child safe, the best thing would be to do this. Now, of course, we're talking about an educational environment, so probably you cannot put armed guards in the front. Yeah. So then it needs to be broken down to the level of protection that can be used under the circumstances of the certain space that we're talking about. But other than that, you have to communicate it directly to the people that are responsible for, being the ones in charge in the space. And I mean, it's one thing to have a person sitting in front of a classroom wearing a suit and a headset and, all of that, but it might also be, somebody looking like a janitor. So I'm not saying pull out all your costumes, but I'm saying if we have a certain situation, again, we need to sit together and communicate. How do we make this happen in this certain space? And I'm sure a lot of professionals that are out there are going to say, listen, I'm not changing clothes just because somebody, and I would even understand that. But again, we're talking about potential harm or scars or trauma for a child that also needs to cope with having people, paying attention to them all the time. So it is tricky. I'm not saying it's easy, but again, this is why it needs discussion. This is why it needs consultation, thought, and then the question, what is manageable? What is feasible?
Mm-hmm. I think you're totally right. Anything where they're surrounding a threat to the children, it's going to be direct to the parents, the principal, and say, look, this is what we're aware of. They'll be aware of things through their channels. And you have a direct conversation between you. You're there as the professional. You're giving them advice and tools and options. Ultimately, it's going to come down to them, what they want to do. Maybe you've got a great principal and they take everything on board and they really value your opinion and they go with what you're saying. Or you might have someone who's maybe erratic, it's their child, and they go way beyond what is, I don't know, what's the word, non-erratic, plausible,
Mm-hmm.
No, I want armored cars for my children outside the school, this X, Y, and Z. And ultimately it'll come down to the children, but that direct communication between the security professional who's delivering it, educating them, and it just depends on what stage of development they're in as well. The parents, like we said, if they're open to suggestions and information, they'll make some good decisions. But maybe they don't, and they are the boss, and they are telling you what you have to do, and then it's down to you to work with what you've got, right? To provide that safe environment. You're there to give the tools, whether they choose to take them or not, is down to them, and you can only work with what you've got.
But are you also giving those tools to the butler, to the nanny, and then when does that become like a hang on overreach? Like you're adding a lot of value, training the whole team, but like where does that stop?
I don't think it does stop. I think if there's a child at threat, for a particular family, everyone surrounding that family, and it would be butlers, drivers, everybody would have had some form of brief training, whatever it may be, in situational awareness when they're coming to the property, when they're leaving the property, anything surrounding the family, anything that looks out of place, they would have been spoken to and told this needs to be fed up the chain immediately. So there will be, they're not going to go be taken away and doing bodyguard course or whatever it may be, but there will be some form of briefing with the relevant staff members for sure if there's a real threat to that family.
And also the question is, and this then links to personality, the question is, are you a type of person that wants to know, or you rather not know? Like you want somebody else to take care of the problem. So when it comes then to team members, I mean, if you have been signed up for a detail to be the protector, it's very clear you got to know in order to work around it. But, the nanny is not probably very happy to know that there is something going on, or that the servants in the house or other people, on the property, they might be like, oh my God, what's going on now? I want to go home now. I want to leave. I want to escape as soon as I can. So it is really also a question of mindset, if you will, or personality. The question, do you want to know in order to be ahead of the curve? And this is something that I would choose. I'm talking just about myself right now. I would always prefer to be ahead of the curve. It might really lead to probably thinking in too much detail or thinking from a lot of different perspectives. But in my understanding, this is what makes it rich and what also gives the team a better and versatile view on a complex issue that we then can decide together on. So this is why this approach is still important, I think.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the start. And I know we were talking about security operatives at the start and getting the right people for the right position. But I think that carries across the board. If you're working in a family environment, one of the things I have learned, you have to have really thick skin, because, there is going to be times when you're getting shouted at, maybe even things thrown at you. I've seen it happen. You've got to have thick skin, and you have to take things on the chin. And I think one of the things that I've always tried to be, when I've employed guys who've worked with families, is you've got to be a really strong line manager. So if the family really loves John, or they really love whoever, you have to try and educate them. Look, you can't have John 24/7 days a week. If you keep John, this amount of time, you're not going to have John for much longer, because he has a family that he has to go back to. He has to have his time on holiday, whatever it is. And I see my chief role really when working with some of these families, it's almost as, excuse the language, a shit deflector, that you have to go there and literally, because the guys are in such a position where sometimes they can't speak out. They've got the relationship with the child, they can't with the family, and sometimes it's got to be someone above the umbrella just going in there and saying, look, trying to give some sanity to the family and saying, look, you can't have this guy for this. He's away. He just lost his mother or his father. He has to go. Life happens around. It's not just their life that's going on here. Everyone, life is just churning all the time, and sometimes you need someone to step in when the person on the ground doesn't have the tools to kind of withdraw from that situation. Maybe sometimes they need to be removed by the line manager, who steps in and says, look, you're changing out. They're doing this trip because we need to get the other guys in there as well. It's no good for the family. It's unhealthy to just be stuck with these individuals, because then if you're sick, ill, whatever it may be, where's the resilience? Where's the that there's no margin for change, right?
But can I then relate that, just because obviously I'm Mr. Plain Vanilla, Mr. Uninitiated, right? To the protector who's not gone through this type of training, they might think, oh dear, now I have to go do a master's in behavioral analytics, and that's a lot of work. But what does the training look like? Like what would a syllabus even look like?
Mm-hmm. So if we're looking at behavioral analysis in general, it would, in my case, in my training program, involve the observation of behaviors in context, which means really learning how to adapt your observational skills when being in certain situation, meaning in a conversation, in a setting, on a scene, entering a premises. It really is about learning how to move the eyes on a body in order to make sense of a situation. Then it is really also related to self-reflection, being aware of your own biases, how they sidetrack you, how they kind of influence what you see and what you think. And then it really becomes about the question, where do you think of applying it? Do you need really fast eyes, like in risk assessment? We need to be able to spot, we need to be able to scan, we need to be able to get a general sense, like, if you will, a feeling of the situation. Or is it really just, and forgive me for saying just, looking at a screen at a CCTV, yeah, which I'm not saying is easy. I'm just saying it depends on the task, what kind of skill set you might want to enhance. So it really depends on from what background you come and where you want to apply it. But the general line is understanding behaviors in context, looking at behaviors in terms of movement, understanding verbal and nonverbal communication, understanding intercultural aspects, and your own reflection and biases that come and influence the communication process. And when it comes to the child, when it comes to the security management around children, the approach is different. It is really going from understanding the developmental stages, the psychophysical developmental stages, understanding bonding behavior and stress management, coping strategies of all involved, basics of leadership, and basics of intercultural communication, and how all of that is influencing risks while on the task. So the focus of this training is not so much reading the behaviors, it is using the reading of behaviors in order to mitigate risks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you can do a training course and you're never going to master everything, right? It's giving you tools. And I think one of the great things I learned, it was actually when I kind of stepped away from working as a bodyguard, I've done some NLP training, and one great thing I learned, the map is not the territory, they say, is one of the rules. And what that means is everyone sees something in a different way. I don't know how many messages a second our body gets. 20,000 messages when you walk into you look in the cupboard for a can of beans, and you're like, I cannot find this can of beans, and then someone else just goes and they'll pick it straight out, because you're kind of filtering lots of things out. And when you're dealing with families and different people, they will see a situation completely different to how you see it. And sometimes you just got to pull yourself out and almost give yourself a bird's eye view and think, right, let's look at this rationally. And I think it's just, even that, just learning that as a skill is going to give you tools to go, not just be totally emotionally charged when something's happening and firing back, just pulling yourself out of the situation and just looking at it rationally, taking a pause, taking that, we call it the condor moment. And it'll give you a completely different view for sure.
That's very, very correct. And also training observational skills in general, just training observational skills, movement analysis of behavior, needs a base of understanding, for example, my own breath pattern, or it needs an understanding of, am I even concentrated today? So this is the basic that, this is where it starts from. Being aware of my own limitations, of the biases, like I mentioned earlier, and also understanding a complex situation with a simple question of what does match and what does not match here. So almost like, having a map on top of a map and thinking, okay, something is off. Something is off. And it really depends on the level of threat. It really depends on how much time I have to observe. Just like I said, the typical thing is opening a door, entering a space, guiding somebody in, going from A to B. And it's just like almost cutting through the space without any time to observe much. But again, spotting in this kind of environment is possible. And this is what your eyes is trained for. This is what has been put in our system, thousands of years ago, so it works. But you need to be able to know how to rely on those skills and how to probably enhance them when you are doing specific details in a specific environment.
Hmm. No, absolutely.
Well, I like that, and I think that's practical for the protector. I'm always on the practical side, like the yes, but now what type of side. Where next can we find you? You very kindly came to London to the 9th annual CPTF, which was great, and a lot of our listeners got a chance to meet you, myself included. But where next can we find you?
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you again. The conference was excellent, so I really enjoyed it. And I hope I'll be there next time again. So yes, the next thing that's coming up is on the 25th of February. So from 6 to 7 p.m. Central European time, I'm going to do an introduction to the security management of children training. It's going to be online. You can find all the information on LinkedIn. And this is really the first introduction to the industry, if you will. Anybody who's interested in that and thinks this might be, worthwhile their time, are very welcome to join me there. And there are two more things coming up. One is I'm doing a joint venture, if you will, together with Michael Wagg. We're doing a series called Perspectives. And this is going to be, the first one is going to be on the 29th of February from 8 to 9 p.m. And it's going to be looking at incidents that are currently interesting, either for the industry or for the security management arena. And we're going to be discussing those with experts from the field. And the last thing that is interesting probably is that I'm joining the ASPIDA 77 Women in Protection. And I'm going to be also doing an introduction for them for the security management around children. So these three things are coming up, and I'm very excited to do them online or even in person when there's time and when I can.
Fantastic. And I think even I've seen some ASPIDA announcements by Monica
Exactly.
coming up. So that's great fun. Fantastic. Okay, well, this is a tour de force, but with a practical application around behavioral analysis and risk factors for children. Shaun West and myself, we have been delighted to speak with Sandra Adiarte, and this has been another fantastic edition of the Circuit Magazine podcast. Well, thank you very much, Sandra. And what a great topic, behavioral analysis, risk factors for children. Shaun, what did you make of today's session?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It actually took me back a number of times to, situations that I've dealt with, working with different families, situations I'm aware just through working in the industry of other guys or girls that have been working in, an emotive family environment. And it just, sometimes you forget about these things that have happened over the years, but when you talk back through them, there's so many skills that you learn that sometimes I feel like you can't be taught. You've got to live them. But speaking to Sandra, maybe these can be taught, because them skills you kind of learn on the job, right? And if you can learn them and they're taught to you, they better prepare you for when situations happen. So no, it was really interesting. I enjoyed it. I thought you came up with some great relevant points surrounding families, how to talk with children, how to have them professional barriers. No, I really enjoyed it. I thought there was a lot to take away from that, especially if you're a newcomer and you're working in a family environment.
Yeah, because at least as a newcomer, you should say, do I know how to do this? And honestly, if I think about it, I don't know the nuanced communication that I would use to speak to a 6-year-old versus a 9-year-old. I kind of think I talk to them the same way, but then maybe that's not the best thing, especially if I need them to understand risk. I know Sandra said just tell it like it is, maybe, be very open and honest, but I still think that there is a distinct way of explaining high threat risk to, a child. What do you think, Shaun?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, right? I think in my mind, if there's threats surrounding the children, I'm talking to the parents. Unless it's in that moment when you're grabbing the kid and saying, "Right, you follow me." You're getting in the car. Like, other than that, we're talking to the parents, and yeah, there's a lot of training around that as well. you've seen many, I don't know, security managers, team leaders who can get dropped into a position that maybe don't have the right tools for that job. There's many people who are great bodyguards or great soldiers, but as soon as they become a team leader or an NCO in the army, maybe they don't have them same skills. They can sync. Where you can also have the opposite flip side, where people are a great leader, but maybe they didn't have the correct skills to be a bodyguard, right? And I think it's putting them right people in the right place that can navigate, who have the communication skills to speak with people up and down the levels, parent level, child level, and you build it's the same as working in an organization. You're speaking to the janitor compared to the CEO. If you're somebody who has the skill set who can talk up and down that line, you're going to be very well received.
And I think that also links into other sessions we've had on the podcast where we talked about the dangers of the buddyguard. Because I can imagine getting buy-in of a 5-year-old could involve becoming their buddy. What do you think?
Yeah, no, it definitely can, and it's an easy situation to be pulled into, right? And I think it's, especially if you're new to the industry, it's something that you can easily fall foul of, where it's, everyone likes to be liked. And if that child takes I want to be with Phelim, you're going to want to kind of just grow that relationship, because you're just starting out in the industry and you think, yeah, this is cementing my role. But really, it can be a real double-edged sword. And you definitely need to keep them professional barriers, which we spoke about, because you'll find yourself, you can be sucked in and you're great at first, but once you start losing every Christmas, every summer holiday, and when everyone else is getting their time off and you're pulled straight back in, it can wear a bit thin. The tolerance gets less the longer you're in the industry. And I guess if you have them barriers set out from the start, you've got a lot more longevity.
And maybe your ability to say no diminishes because you're the buddy. I don't know. Well, this is certainly something worth investigating, and maybe even inquiring, how much do I know? Maybe it's a good time to check in, which I think is always good. And it was great to see Sandra at the 9th annual CP Tech Forum. And I know she's come with many recommendations from several people in the industry. So thank you. You know who you are out there. What else have we got coming up? Because, obviously the magazine is underway and the podcast is underway. What's happening in the world of the circuit magazine, Shaun?
Yeah, we've got the next issue, which should be ready to drop right about now. I think by the time you listen to this should be out. Another great issue, and some great articles in there. I think I've even got an article in there myself this month, which is great. Being involved, sometimes it's difficult when you're busy at writing stuff. Put a lot of content posts out, I guess, but getting back into the habit of writing articles, it's a little bit more difficult on your time. It takes a little bit more thought. But yeah, so we've got that issue coming out, and yeah, I think we've got some more good podcast guests lined up, which will be fantastic. It'll be good to get them out. And yeah, I think onwards and upwards, always.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that you found the time to write an article. Of course, we're looking for contribution for people to write an article. And I think it's important to have that mixture, the podcast format, the written word format, because people consume information in different ways at different times. And I think it's important to realize that if we speak to the community in the manner in which they've expected to be spoken to, that's good. If I reflect all the way back to the very first Circuit Magazine podcast, we sort of said, well, why are we doing it? And so why not? But also because it's a ready channel that people want to be aware of. Also, in that vein, I know James Bohr, a frequent contributor to the magazine, is coming out very, very soon, if not already, with a book collecting his publications on cybersecurity, which I think is called The Cyber Circuit. And that's from his contributions to our magazine. and it's got that coming out, or it may already have come out. 5 years of articles on dozens of cybersecurity topics written for the casual and curious reader, originally published in the Circuit magazine. There we go. So we're making progress. We're making waves, aren't we, Shaun?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And he's provided quite a few articles now for the magazine, and he's been a guest. So no, it's great to see him moving forward in his career as well and reverting back to us. That's fantastic.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thanks very much for packaging that up in a wonderful format. And obviously, there will be an ebook. I know I talked about different formats people like to, have written word and listening, because that could be you, the protector on the move, standing in a hallway. You might be boarding a plane, downloading a bunch of podcasts before you don't get reception or something. So there's everything to play for. We're very conscious that people consume content in different ways. That being said, we love hearing from you. If you think, oh no, we get feedback from everybody all the time, I don't need to give them feedback, please do, because we do appreciate it, and it can make a difference to the direction of the podcast.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Sandra Adiarte, thank you very much for coming on and talking about behavioral analysis and risk factors for children. I think this is really key. More investment will be spent by ultra high net worth individuals, in this area. So let's get on that steam train. From Shaun West and myself, this has been another fantastic edition of the Circuit Magazine podcast.
You have been listening to the Circuit Magazine podcast. Be sure to subscribe and be sure to not miss an episode.